Evelyn sat at the far end of the dining table, her hands folded gently on her lap. The room buzzed with laughter and the clinking of silverware, but none of it reached her. The chandelier above flickered slightly, casting a pale yellow hue over the polished table, now crowded with plates of food she hadn't helped make. She used to host these dinners, used to plan every detail, from the napkin folds to the dessert tray. Now, she wasn't even asked to stir the gravy. Across the table, her son Todd laughed at something his wife, Melanie, had said. Evelyn hadn't caught the joke, not that it mattered. She had tried to speak earlier, to offer help when Melanie fumbled with the serving spoon, but her offer had been met with a quick, "No, no, just sit, Mom." There was no softness in her voice, just dismissal. Evelyn had smiled anyway, out of habit more than anything else. She picked at the mashed potatoes on her plate. They were dry and cold now, untouched. She wasn't really hungry. Her appetite had gone missing somewhere between the second forced laugh and the 10th time someone talked over her. The chair she sat in felt foreign, as if her presence had been wedged into a space no longer meant for her. "Mom, you forgot to turn off the porch light again last night," Todd said suddenly, loud enough to break through the low hum of conversation. Everyone turned to look at her. Evelyn blinked. I thought I did," she said gently. Todd shook his head and smiled the way people do when they've stopped trying to hide their annoyance. "Well, you didn't. It stayed on all night, just like last Tuesday." Melanie smirked and took a sip of her wine. "Maybe we need one of those smart home systems. You know, something automatic, less room for forgetfulness." There was laughter, not loud, not cruel, just casual, the kind that cut deeper because it didn't sound like anyone even realized. They were cutting. Evelyn nodded slowly and looked down at her plate. Once, Todd used to ask her for advice. He'd come into her kitchen with bills he didn't understand or car paperwork he forgot to sign. Melanie used to bake with her, or at least pretend to enjoy it. Evelyn remembered flour-dusted aprons and giggling over burned cookies. Now, Melanie made everything from boxed kits and ordered cakes when company came over. No more aprons, no more giggling. Across from her, 10-year-old Emma, her granddaughter, sat playing with the peas on her plate. Unlike the adults, she seemed quiet, not bored, just observant. Evelyn gave her a small smile, and for the briefest moment, Emma looked up and returned it. Then the conversation moved on without Evelyn, spinning away into talk of new phones, Todd's job promotion, and a neighbor's remodeling project. She tried to chime in when someone mentioned gardening, but her voice barely carried, and no one responded. She wasn't sure they even heard her. Evelyn sipped her water and folded her napkin in half, then again, then in quarters. Her fingers needed something to do. After dessert, store-bought pie that no one seemed to finish, Evelyn helped clear the table. Melanie waved her off, but Evelyn followed into the kitchen anyway, carrying a stack of plates. "You really don't have to," Melanie said, voice tight. "I don't mind," Evelyn replied. But she could see it, the flicker of annoyance, the sideways glance, the heavy silence. Evelyn stacked the plates neatly in the sink, rinsed them quickly, and stepped back. Her hands trembled slightly, more from restraint than age. As she walked back toward the table, Emma followed her. She tugged gently at Evelyn's sweater. "Grandma?" she whispered, glancing toward the kitchen to make sure no one was listening. Evelyn crouched a little, just enough to hear her better. "They said you won't be around much longer," Emma whispered, eyes wide and unsure. "Is that true?" Evelyn froze, her breath caught, and her mind raced. She looked into her granddaughter's face, that open, curious innocence, and felt a slow ache rise through her chest. "Who said that, sweetheart?" Evelyn asked quietly. Emma looked down at her shoes. "I don't know. I think Mommy. Maybe Daddy too." Evelyn reached out and gently cupped the side of Emma's face. "I'm still here," she said. "And I plan to be. For a while yet." Emma nodded and wrapped her arms around Evelyn's waist. The hug was soft, unexpected, real. It broke something loose in Evelyn. Not sorrow, not rage. Something steadier. A quiet resolve. Later that night, when Evelyn returned to the guest room, the room Melanie insisted was cozier for her than the one she used to sleep in, she sat down at the small desk by the window. The stars outside blinked faintly over the Oregon trees, and the distant sound of wind rustled the dry leaves. She opened her old leather-bound notebook, the one she kept for her garden plans, grocery lists, and reminders. But tonight, she didn't write any of those. Instead, on a clean page, she wrote just one line. "They think I'm fading, but I'm just getting quiet before the storm." She closed the book, placed it in the drawer, and turned off the lamp. Tomorrow, she would do something different. Something they wouldn't expect. And maybe, just maybe, the next chair at the table wouldn't feel so empty. The morning air was sharp with the scent of rain-soaked pine when Evelyn stepped out of her room. The hallway felt colder than usual, quieter too. Something in the air felt off, like the house had exhaled without her. She moved slowly toward the kitchen, planning to make herself a cup of tea, but stopped abruptly at the sight near the front door. Boxes, 5 of them, neatly taped, labeled in bold black marker. Evelyn, bedroom. Evelyn, books. Evelyn, miss. Linens, guess. Evelyn, photos. She stared at them for a long moment, as if blinking would change what she saw. Each box was one more piece of her life, folded up, taped shut, and waiting to be carried out. Melanie appeared behind her, almost casually, as if she hadn't noticed the shock washing over Evelyn's face. "Oh, good morning," Melanie said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "We were just trying to get ahead of things. It'll make the move easier." Evelyn turned to face her. "What move?" Melanie tilted her head. "Didn't Todd mention it? We've been looking at senior living communities for you. Really nice ones. With game nights and all that. Honestly, we thought you'd be more comfortable there." "Comfortable?" Evelyn repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Melanie gave a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This house has stairs, drafty windows. You said your knees hurt sometimes. We just thought, well, you'd be safer in a place with support." Evelyn took a breath and tried to steady herself. "You were going to tell me when exactly?" Melanie didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the dining table and rearranged a stack of mail, avoiding Evelyn's eyes. Evelyn's gaze returned to the boxes, her photo albums, her books, her late husband's war medals, all packed without her consent, as if she were already gone. Todd walked in a moment later, car keys in hand. "Hey, Mom," he said, smiling too brightly. "Mel told you about the new place?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "She mentioned it." Todd nodded. "We've already done some paperwork. There's a room available next week. We thought we'd drive you over Saturday to take a look." Evelyn blinked. "You did paperwork?" He paused. "Just the basic stuff. Pre-application, things like that. Nothing binding." Evelyn looked back at the boxes. Her world was being disassembled around her while she was still standing in it. "I said I wanted to move," she said. Todd shrugged. "You didn't have to. You've been tired lately. You barely participate in things. We figured this was best. For everyone." "For everyone," she repeated slowly. Melanie chimed in from across the room. "You'd have your own space, your own routine, and we'd have peace of mind. It's not personal, Evelyn. Not personal, like removing a rug that didn't match the furniture anymore." Evelyn didn't respond. She just turned and walked slowly back to her room, her slippers brushing across the wooden floor. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the familiar quilt beneath her hands. Her husband's quilt. She remembered stitching it together one winter when he was recovering from pneumonia. He'd chosen the fabric, bright blues and burnt orange, and insisted it didn't match, but it made her laugh. She reached for her notebook and opened it to the last page, where she had written the night before. "They think I'm fading, but I'm just getting quiet before the storm." A knock came at the door, but she didn't answer. She closed the notebook, slipped it into her bag, and stood. When she came back down the hallway, Melanie and Todd were whispering near the kitchen. They didn't see her at first. "She's just wasting space now," Melanie murmured. "We need the room." Todd nodded. "She won't fight it. She never has." Evelyn stopped, feet rooted to the floor. They need the room. She wasn't a person anymore, just clutter to be managed. She stepped forward, loud enough that they turned. "I'm going out," she said. "I'll be back later." Todd started to respond, but she was already at the door. Her hand hovered over the boxes for a second, but she didn't touch them. Instead, she picked up her coat, slipped it on with quiet dignity, and walked outside. The wind was stronger now, tugging at her scarf. She pulled it tighter and started walking, not toward the bus stop, not toward the park. She didn't yet know where she was going, but she knew what she was leaving behind. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee. A single bed, a flickering lamp, and a tiny TV bolted to the wall. None of it felt like home. But it was quiet, and it was hers, for now. Evelyn slid her suitcase against the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The springs sighed under her weight, like even they had grown tired. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, settling on the mirror above the dresser. It was cracked in the corner, the kind of mirror that had reflected 1,000 tired travelers before her. She stood and walked toward it. Her reflection stared back, deep-set eyes, silver hair pulled into a bun, a jawline once sharp now softened by time. But it was her. And for the first time in days, she felt the stillness of being alone with herself. She reached up and brushed her fingers against her cheek. "Useless," she whispered. That's what they had said, that she was just wasting space. But as she looked into the mirror, memories rippled behind her eyes like old film reels, her holding Todd for the first time, his cries fitting perfectly into the curve of her arms. The early mornings she made lunches, the nights she stayed up to sew costumes for school plays, the way her husband once looked at her, like she was the anchor in a storm. They forgot who she was, but she remembered. She turned away from the mirror and opened her purse. Inside was the small notebook she always carried, its pages dog-eared and filled with grocery lists, scribbled poems, and reminders to pay bills. But nestled beneath it was something she hadn't touched in years, a brass key, worn smooth, cold in her hand. It had once opened the lockbox at the credit union, a box her husband had set up before he died. "For emergencies," he had said, handing her the key in the hospital room with trembling fingers. "Only if the world forgets who you are." She hadn't thought about that moment in years, but now it glowed in her memory like a light, house blinking through fog. Evelyn gripped the key tightly and whispered, "Time to reopen what they forgot." She slipped the key back into her purse and sat on the bed again. Her mind drifted to Todd, his face as a boy, laughing in the yard with a frog in his hand. He had once believed she could fix anything: Band-Aids, broken toys, hurt feelings. Now he believed she was a burden. She wasn't sure what changed. Maybe Melanie. Maybe time. Maybe they'd never really seen her, just what she could do for them. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself water from the chipped motel glass. She took a slow sip and let the silence wrap around her. The grief settled deep in her chest. Not just grief for the rejection, but for the slow unraveling of everything she thought was solid. The house, the family dinners, the idea that she would be cared for, the way she had cared for them. Gone. And yet, there was a strange fire building inside her, a slow burn she hadn't felt in years. Grit. She wasn't ready to disappear. Not yet. She stood and pulled open her suitcase. There wasn't much. 2 cardigans, some folded slacks, a framed photo of her husband. She set the frame on the nightstand and stared at his face. "I hope you still believe in me," she whispered. The wind outside howled through the motel's cheap window pane. Evelyn walked to the glass and looked out. Cars passed occasionally. People lived their lives just beyond that wall, unaware of the quiet revolution brewing in room 6. She thought about the bank, the lockbox. Whatever her husband had left for her was still there, untouched, waiting. A sudden knock startled her. She stepped back, heart pounding, but when she looked through the peephole, it was just the motel manager dropping off a blanket. She waited until the footsteps faded, then locked the door again and double-checked it. Trust didn't come easy anymore. She sat back at the desk and pulled her notebook close. Turning to a clean page, she began to write. They said I was done, but maybe they spoke too soon. She paused. Tomorrow, I reopen the box, the one that holds more than papers. It holds proof, and I'll use every piece of it to remind them who I am. She underlined the last sentence. Then she clicked off the lamp, laid down on the stiff mattress, and pulled the motel blanket over her shoulders. The mirror watched her in the dark, cracked, yes, but still standing, just like her. Evelyn stepped into the bank just as the morning light filtered through the tall windows. The place hadn't changed much, still quiet, still humming with the low shuffle of feet and the occasional printer noise. She adjusted her scarf, clutched her purse, and walked up to the reception desk. "Good morning," she said softly. "I have an appointment with Carla Whitman." The receptionist smiled and gestured toward a hallway. "She's expecting you. Last office on the left." Evelyn followed the carpeted path, her heels clicking faintly. Her fingers touched the key in her purse like a talisman. It had been 20 years since she and her husband opened that account. She could still remember the day. He had insisted they keep something aside. "Just in case life turned sideways," he'd said, with a wink and that tired wisdom in his eyes. She had almost forgotten about it. Almost. Carla stood to greet her at the office door. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and neatly pinned blonde hair, she shook Evelyn's hand with both of hers. "It's good to see you again, Mrs. Moore," Carla said. "I looked over your request. It's all here. Please, have a seat." Evelyn lowered herself into the plush chair and took a slow breath. "We opened that account in 2003, she began. "Never touched it after he passed. I just need to know if it's still there." Carla nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's a joint savings account under your name and Mr. Henry Moore. Dormant, but not closed." She turned her screen in slightly and tapped a few keys. "You'll be pleased to know it accrued steady interest all these years. And," she paused and looked at Evelyn with a warm smile, "you have just over $172,000 in it." Evelyn blinked. The number hovered in the air like an answered prayer. She started, but her voice caught in her throat. "I thought maybe a few thousand, maybe less." Carla leaned forward. "Your husband was a thoughtful man. He set up a compounding interest structure. It was a quiet account, but very well designed." Evelyn felt the weight of those words settle into her bones. Quiet, but well designed. That had been Henry all over. She wiped at her eyes and smiled. "He always said he wanted me taken care of, even if the world forgot to." Carla gave her a gentle nod. Looks like he kept his promise. For a few minutes, Evelyn sat in silence, watching the numbers on the paper Carla printed out. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded the paper and tucked it into her purse. Carla stood. "There's one more thing." Evelyn looked up. Carla reached for a small drawer and pulled out a file. "Your name is still listed as the sole owner of a small plot of land on Birch Hollow Road. It's a half-acre. Looks like it was purchased outright in 1998. You never sold it." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Birch Hollow? That's across from Todd's house. I forgot we even owned that." Carla smiled knowingly. "It's still in your name, still yours. Unless, of course, you'd like to sell." Evelyn chuckled under her breath. "No," she said. "No, I don't think I want to sell." She stood, clutching her purse tighter now, her back a little straighter. As she left the office and stepped back into the lobby, the world felt wider. The same cars passed outside, the same cold morning wind. But Evelyn felt a rush of clarity sweep through her. They thought she had nothing. They thought she'd just slip away. But she had this account. She had this land. She had something more than they ever gave her credit for. Her husband had prepared for this, quietly, deliberately. And now, after all this time, Evelyn realized she didn't have to beg for space in someone else's house. She could create her own. Again. She walked out of the bank and stood at the corner, staring across the street where a realtor's sign caught her eye. Then, across from that, where she remembered the hollow land on Birch. An idea began to take root, not born out of revenge, but out of power, out of legacy. The land was hers. And maybe, just maybe, she'd build something of her own, right across from those who thought she had nowhere else to go. As she reached into her purse to put the paperwork away, her fingers brushed the motel key again. One key had locked her in. Now another might set her free. Evelyn stood beneath the swaying branches of the maple tree at the edge of the gravel drive, her eyes locked on the derelict mansion across the road from her son's home. The air was cool, damp with early morning mist, but her hands felt warm, wrapped around the deed in her coat pocket. It was hers. The land, the house, the story that would unfold within it. Hers. The house had once belonged to a reclusive artist, someone the neighborhood children whispered about and avoided. Now, the place was forgotten, the yard overgrown, the porch sagging, and shingles peeling like old bark. But to Evelyn, it gleamed with possibility. A white van pulled into the drive. Painted on the side were the words, "Harris Daughters Restoration." Evelyn waved. A burly man stepped out and approached her. "You must be Mrs. Gardner," he said, extending his hand. "We spoke on the phone?" "That's me," Evelyn replied with a small smile. "She needs a new roof, a new porch, new everything, but she's still standing, just like me." He chuckled. "We'll get started this week. Permits approved. First phase is structural. You sure you want to do this now? It's a big job." "I've waited long enough," Evelyn said firmly. "Let's begin." Across the road, behind perfectly trimmed hedges, Evelyn spotted the curtain twitch in her daughter-in-law's living room. Then another twitch upstairs. She could feel them watching, probably wondering who the workers were, probably wondering what that old woman was doing on a property they thought she'd forgotten. As the workers began marking off the perimeter, measuring support beams and clearing brush, Evelyn sat down on a weathered bench that had managed to survive the years of neglect. She remembered this view from decades ago, back when her husband first pointed to the mansion during a walk and said, "Imagine the stories that house could tell." She had laughed at the time. It was too big, too bold. But now, it felt just right. That afternoon, deliveries came. Lumber, paint, tile, new windows. The noise from the trucks echoed down the quiet street, drawing attention. By the second day, neighbors started whispering. Evelyn heard one of them say, "I thought she was moving into assisted living." On the third day, Evelyn walked the perimeter with the project manager. He showed her the floor plans. "We're restoring the original wood floors. You sure you want the front parlor turned into a library?" She nodded. "Books are where I found myself. It should be the heart of the home." The scent of sawdust filled the air. Hammering became her morning music. And every afternoon, Evelyn made sure to sit on her folding chair facing her son's house. Not with malice, but with quiet intent. She wanted them to see that she hadn't vanished, that she wasn't finished. The turning point came a week later. Her daughter-in-law, Rachel, was unloading groceries when she finally snapped. Evelyn heard her voice float across the lawn. "Wait, is that my mother-in-law moving in?" The words weren't laced with welcome. They were sharp, tinged with disbelief and panic. Evelyn turned her head, locked eyes with Rachel, and offered a smile. "Hello, dear. Just settling in." Rachel stormed inside, and within minutes, Evelyn saw her son's car barrel into the driveway. He didn't come across the street. Not yet. But the tentae Cyan was thick enough to slice through. The very idea that she could not only survive without them, but thrive directly across from them, had shattered whatever illusion of control they'd clung to. That night, Evelyn stood in the front yard, holding a paint swatch up to the porch columns. Soft forest green, classic, strong, unapologetic. "You're different now," she whispered to the house. "And so am I." Inside, the rooms echoed with new breath. The air was still dusty, but it no longer felt forgotten. Evelyn had found a rhythm, picking light fixtures, choosing new wallpaper, planning a garden where the weeds once ruled. She wasn't just rebuilding a home, she was rebuilding her voice. And every time she walked up the stairs, past the window overlooking her son's backyard, she did so without flinching. The woman they called useless had just bought the mansion next door, and she was just getting started. The morning sun rose over the newly painted white columns of the Parsons house, casting golden light across the freshly trimmed lawn. Evelyn stood by the large bay window, adjusting the lace curtains she'd chosen herself. She wore a soft lavender blouse, the kind her husband once said made her look like spring. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From something far rarer. Anticipation. Inside, the scent of lemon scones and chamomile tea filled the rooms. Fresh flowers graced the antique tables. She'd spent days arranging the event, inviting old friends, neighbors, and even the librarian who'd once been her apprentice. She didn't send a single invitation to her son or his wife. They didn't need one. By noon, the gate creaked open. Mrs. Harland from the post office stepped inside first, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "I had to see it with my own eyes," she said, eyes wide. "They said you bought this place. That you, of all people, were the new owner of Parsons' house." Evelyn smiled with a grace so quiet it hushed the room. "Guilty," she said, accepting the bouquet. One by one they arrived. Men in pressed shirts who remembered Evelyn shelving books in the library basement. Women who whispered, "She was always so quiet, but look at her now." Even a few teenagers came by, drawn by the rumors. Some had laughed at her rusting Buick a few weeks ago. Now they took photos beside her wraparound porch, like tourists in front of a landmark. The chatter grew into admiration. She restored the crown molding. Those original fixtures. Did you see the staircase? Outside, the street buzzed. From across the road, Evelyn's former home sat still, its windows like narrowed eyes. She'd heard the whispers, how her daughter-in-law had called her a burden, how her son had said she was no longer useful. But now they watched as the town praised the woman they'd dismissed. Inside the kitchen, Evelyn poured tea for a young woman named Haley, who'd once taken over her storytime slot at the library. "I always thought you left town," Haley said. "No one had seen you around. We figured, well, We figured you were done. Evelyn stirred her tea slowly. Turns out I wasn't finished, just overlooked. Haley blushed. It's beautiful what you've done. This house. It's like you brought it back to life. Evelyn tilted her head. It brought me back too. Outside, cars began to line the street. A whisper ran through the guests. The historic Parsons house is hers now. She bought it in cash. Every so often, someone peeked through the front curtains. Across the street, Evelyn's son, Robert, stood near his driveway, arms crossed. His wife paced beside him, phone in hand. Neither dared walk over. Until they did. It was nearly the end of the event. The last wave of guests lingered with tea and compliments when Evelyn heard the subtle clink of the iron gate unlatching. She turned slowly. There, just outside the newly painted fence, stood Robert, her son. His tie hung loose. In his hands he held a bottle of wine, unopened, label still crisp. His shoulders were hunched, but his eyes searched the garden, the crowd, and finally found hers. Their gazes locked. He didn't smile. She didn't wave. Behind him, his wife stayed frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the towering white mansion they never thought she could own. A place they likely once dreamed of buying themselves, before they forced her out with boxes and half-truths. The moment stretched like a violin string. Neighbors turned, noticing. Murmurs rose. Whispers returned. But this time not in judgment, rather in fascination. "Isn't that her son?" someone whispered. "Did he really try to put her in a home?" Robert stepped forward, gripping the bottle tighter. Evelyn stood taller. She didn't move. She didn't invite him in. Not with words, not with eyes, not with gestures. He was outside the gate, and that's exactly where he would stay. The same gate he never once thought she'd walk through as the owner. Now it was hers, and so was everything inside. Evelyn chose the cafe on Main Street. Small, quiet, visible. It was where they used to go after Sunday service when Robert was still a boy, and she still believed love always came back home. Now, the sunlight through the glass window exposed more than the dust on the tabletops. It revealed a mother waiting for the son who'd packed her into silence. Robert arrived 5 minutes late, just enough to test control. He wore a collared shirt, but it wasn't ironed. In his hand, no wine bottle this time. Just a phone and a cautious glance that told her this meeting wasn't entirely his idea. "Mom," he said, pulling out a chair, voice low. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." She gave a single nod and folded her hands in front of her. She didn't offer warmth, only space. That was all she owed him now. There was a pause, the kind where words beg to fill. Silence, but none feel honest enough to survive the room. "I wanted to say," he began, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry for the way things happened. We should have handled it differently." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Differently?" Robert shifted in his seat. "I was just thinking about your safety, your comfort. Claire said, well, we thought the senior center might give you more help. I didn't want you to be lonely." Evelyn let the silence sit between them like a second presence. She watched him squirm, watched the man she raised shrink beneath his own excuses. "Did you think I was lonely?" she asked, voice calm. "When you laughed at me at your dinner table? When Claire said I'd be more comfortable somewhere else? When I found my boxes by the door like a guest overstaying her welcome?" He exhaled sharply. "That wasn't my intention." "But it was your action," she replied. The waitress came by, dropped off tea, and disappeared. Even she seemed to sense the weight hanging between them. Robert leaned forward now. "Mom, can't we just move past it? You bought that house. You made your point." Evelyn blinked slowly. "I didn't buy the house to make a point," she said. "I bought it to remind myself I still belonged somewhere, that I didn't need permission to exist." He looked away. "You've changed." "No," she said. "You did." Another long silence. Robert fidgeted, then looked back at her. "I made a mistake." She softened just enough to let him speak, but not enough to absolve. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought—" He paused. "I thought I was being responsible." Evelyn's eyes sharpened. Responsible would have meant sitting down with me, looking me in the eyes, and asking what I wanted, not drawing up your future plans with me cut out of the picture. His shoulders drooped. I didn't know how to fix it." "You don't," she said, reaching into her bag. But he did. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed, at the edges. Handwriting danced across the surface in firm, familiar strokes. Robert's eyebrows knit together. "What's that?" Evelyn slid it across the table. "Your father wrote it for you, years ago. He asked me to give it to you if I ever felt the need to defend myself from our own blood." Robert hesitated, then picked it up and began reading. His hands shook slightly as his eyes scanned the words. Whatever the letter said, he didn't speak while reading it. His face paled. His jaw clenched. When he finished, he folded it slowly, almost reverently, and placed it back on the table between them. "I didn't know he felt that way," he murmured. Evelyn sipped her tea. "He saw through things you tried to hide, even when you were young." Robert didn't speak for a while. Eventually he said, "What now?" Evelyn stood. "You didn't lose your mother," she said, voice strong, eyes steady. "You gave her away." She turned toward the window, then looked back at him one final time. "I just took her back." Then she walked out, her steps unhurried, her spine unbowed. Robert sat alone, a letter in front of him, and everything he once controlled, now just memory and regret. Robert sat alone at the cafe table long after Evelyn had gone. The folded letter from his father sat in front of him, like a time bomb he'd already triggered. He hesitated, then opened it again, as if reading it twice might soften the truth. But it didn't. "Robert, if you're reading this, your mother felt she needed protection. I pray it never came to that, but if it did, listen closely. Your mother is not weak. She's not fragile. She's not a burden to be carried or a problem to be managed. She is the spine of this family, even when you don't see it, especially then." Robert's throat tightened. His father's handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, deliberate, unapologetically clear. The man never wasted words. Every sentence he landed like a weight. "You were a boy when we built that house." She mixed cement with her own hands, carried lumber with her back aching, stretched every dollar so you could have new shoes when we barely had groceries. She never complained, not once. She just kept going. Robert remembered flashes of it now. The early mornings when he'd wake to the sound of a hammer, not knowing his mother was outside fixing a fence post because the hired hand didn't show. The way she made soup stretch for a week when times were tight. The way she stayed up nights sewing patches into his jeans instead of buying new ones. He'd been a child then, and when he grew, he forgot. She taught you how to read before you were 5, sat with you on cold nights when you had nightmares. She held your secrets when you thought no one understood. And if now you see her as disposable, it's not because she changed. It's because you stopped looking. He swallowed hard. You may think you're protecting her. You may convince yourself it's for her safety. But what if it's for your comfort, your convenience? Be honest, Robert. Did you make space for her voice, or did you just mute it? The question echoed louder than any courtroom argument. He had to admit it. He hadn't asked her what she wanted. He hadn't listened. He had made decisions for her, not with her, all under the banner of being responsible. It wasn't responsibility. It was control, dressed as concern. The man who forgets the strength of his mother forgets his own foundation. If you ever stand against her, she won't fight you. She'll outlast you. And you'll find yourself holding nothing but regret. Robert wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. A waitress approached with a refill, saw the letter, the look on his face, and simply nodded before walking away. He looked around the cafe. Everything suddenly felt smaller, like the world had shrunk to the space between him and a hard truth. If she ever gives you this letter, remember who you're speaking to. Not just your mother, but the woman who made you who you are. Respect is not optional. Love, real love, doesn't forget its source. Dad. The words sat like iron on Robert's chest. He hadn't respected her. He hadn't loved her with memory. He hadn't even noticed when the hands that once built his world were pushed aside like clutter. He folded the letter carefully, hands trembling. It felt like holding a confession, one written on his behalf long before he ever made the mistake. Outside, the sky was pale gray. Fall was settling in. Leaves drifted down like slow, deliberate reminders that seasons always change, especially when you're not watching. He stood, walked to the door, but stopped just before leaving. He glanced at the table, at the ghost of the woman who sat across from him an hour ago. And suddenly, everything looked different. He saw the strength in her silence, the power in her presence, the dignity in her departure. She had been right all along. He whispered to no one. I never saw her like this. I didn't know. The soil was richer than she remembered. Evelyn knelt at the edge of the front lawn, gloved hands digging into the earth. Years had passed since she'd gardened like this, knees in the dirt, heart open to the sky. But now, the overgrown grounds of the old Parsons mansion were slowly transforming under her touch. The same hands they once called too fragile were pulling up weeds with quiet power. Around her, laughter trickled through the morning air. A young mother in a sunflower-printed dress helped her toddler water the snapdragons. 2 teenage boys hauled compost bins like they were Olympic weights. A retired teacher showed a 10-year-old how to trellis tomatoes. This wasn't just Evelyn's garden anymore. It belonged to all of them. It had started with a simple flyer she posted at the town library. Looking for helping hands, let's grow something good. At first, only a few came. A shy teenager who wanted community service hours, a grandmother whose own garden had been paved over, a widower who missed his wife's rose bushes. Then more arrived, drawn by the scent of lavender and second chances. They didn't come because she was anyone's mother. They came because she had something to offer, and they saw her. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Across the yard, a familiar figure waved. "Grandma!" Evelyn smiled as her granddaughter, Ella, skipped toward her in jeans and a flannel shirt, a bundle of rosemary in one hand and 2 chocolate croissants in the other. "I brought snacks," Ella beamed. "And rosemary. You always said it was your favorite." Evelyn took the herb and inhaled deeply. Still is. They knelt side by side, clearing a patch for the new plant. "I told Mom I was coming here," Ella said gently. Evelyn didn't flinch. "And?" "She said I should do what I think is right." Ella paused. "I don't know if she meant it or just didn't want to fight." "She's still your mother," Evelyn replied, planting the rosemary. "That matters." Ella looked up. "But she wasn't kind. Not to you." Evelyn pressed the soil in, slow and steady. Sometimes people forget who others are when they're too busy proving who they've become. "I didn't forget," Ella whispered. Not once. Evelyn's eyes softened. I know. They sat quietly, sunlight filtering through the trees. The wind carried the scent of rosemary and turning leaves, like a hymn hummed by the land itself. This place is beautiful, Ella said. I didn't think an old house could feel so alive. It's not the house, Evelyn replied. It's what we decide to grow in it. Nearby, one of the boys called out, Ms. Evelyn, can I move the planter boxes closer to the fence? Evelyn nodded. Thank you, Liam. That's a great idea. Ella watched as the teens moved with purpose. Treya's ting Evelyn not as someone to pity, but someone to respect. You turned this place into something magical. No, Evelyn corrected. We did. All of us. They planted in silence for a while. Then Ella's voice returned, quiet but unwavering. Do you forgive them? Evelyn's hands paused in the soil. The engraving was simple. Polished brass letters, mounted onto a freshly sanded oak plaque, fastened beside the wrought iron gate that had once been coated in years of rust and disregard. Now, it shimmered in the morning sun, greeting every passerby with quiet pride. Parsons' House, home of Evelyn Thomas. No title, no qualifiers, just her name. A name that had once been mumbled in condescension or ignored altogether. Now, it was carved into something that would last longer than gossip, longer than wounds. Evelyn stepped back, fingers brushing the edges of the wood. It had taken months to rebuild the house, but even longer to rebuild the woman who lived inside it. She had rewritten her will the same morning she finalized the mansion deed transfer. George, her late husband's trusted friend and lawyer, sat across the desk as she signed with calm hands. Ella stood beside her, watching with wide, knowing eyes. The estate would go to Ella, not because Evelyn wanted to punish her son and daughter-in-law, but because Ella had shown up. She had listened, dug her hands in the dirt, asked for nothing, and gave freely. I don't need to erase anyone, Evelyn had said as she closed the folder. I just need to remember who never erased me. Now her days flowed with quiet rhythm. Mornings in the garden, afternoons mentoring at the library again, evenings walking through the property she once stood on in exile. People waved when they passed her gate. Some stopped to ask about herbs or roses. A few asked if she taught storytelling classes, the way you used to in the children's section. She smiled each time and replied, "Come by Thursday morning, bring a notebook." The same woman they'd called useless was now a community elder, someone young mothers consulted about parenting books, and teenagers asked about job references. She never bragged. She simply answered with grace, kept her porch open, and let the truth echo where silence once lived. There were awkward encounters. Her son occasionally passed by on his walks, head down, avoiding her gaze. Her daughter-in-law had once stood frozen on the sidewalk, hand clutching her purse like it might shield her from shame. Evelyn never looked away, but she never waved them in either. Some bridges needed fire before they could grow again from ash, and some were better left where they crumbled. Ella came often, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to help prune, sometimes to sit on the porch swing and sip iced tea while the world spun gently around them. One evening, as cicadas hummed and the sun dipped behind the hills, Ella asked, "Do you ever wish you'd yelled more, fought louder?" Evelyn took a long sip before answering. No. They tried to write my ending, but I wrote the next chapter instead. She motioned to the garden, the lights strung over the newly stained patio, the neighborhood kids laughing in the distance. This is louder than anything I could have shouted. Ella leaned her head on Evelyn's shoulder. I'm proud of you. Evelyn smiled softly. I'm proud of the girl who watched and remembered. That night, she stood at her bedroom window, watching the moonlight spill across the driveway, Her eyes found the plaque again. Her name. Her house. Not in defiance, but in truth. She remembered the moment she'd first walked through her son's front door after dinner and felt invisible. The night she found the boxes with her name taped on them like an eviction notice. The motel mirror that had shown her someone faded. But now the mirror showed someone whole. Not perfect, not angry, just present. Her life hadn't ended when they tried to remove her. It had begun again, on her own terms. She closed the curtains, tucked herself into bed, and reached for the journal she kept on the nightstand. She flipped to the back and wrote one final line beneath her last entry. They called me useless, but I rebuilt beside them, and now the land speaks my name.